Now for the final two sessions this afternoon, focusing on policy and regulation in relation to the energy transition, I will hand over the moderating to my colleague Willi Appler, who is responsible for business development and regulatory affairs at gridX. Given his expertise in the field, he'll be chatting to two policy advisors on the rollout of PV systems and EU regulation. First, we'll once again play a video to provide some context into the area. The Paris Agreement was a landmark international treaty on climate change that was adopted by 196 parties in 2015. Working on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action, each country must submit their own plans for action, known as nationally determined contributions. In this way, countries and regions are legally bound to reduce emissions by set amounts, and they receive a framework for financial, technical, and capacity building support, but are responsible for their own long-term development strategies. The European Green Deal is the EU's ambitious policy that aims to cut emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, and to make Europe the world's first climate-neutral continent by 2050. Measures are also in place to become a truly climate-resilient society. Various action initiatives under the Green Deal are aimed at engaging citizens in climate action, enshrining the 2050 climate neutrality objective into EU law, and increasing the ambition of major emitters ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, in Glasgow in November this year. While this sounds like a bold and positive step, EU and national climate policies have, in the past, not always reached the goals they set for themselves. And the carbon reduction path for the future is only becoming more ambitious, as the more straightforward targets, or the low-hanging fruits, are already harvested. Climate policy must therefore strike a difficult balance. While ambitious targets are crucial to mitigate the effects of climate change, public acceptance is also pivotal. As public protests against tax increases for fossil fuels or large onshore wind farms emerge, climate policy has a high risk of getting stuck in discussions about what is the right approach. Regulation must consider the security of energy systems as well as the total economic efficiency. Only when climate policy does not harm our wealth will emerging countries be willing to adopt it. A market approach is necessary to encourage competition among technologies. However, sometimes specific solutions require extra support. Germany's Renewable Energy Act, or EEG, for example, helped to sharply reduce the price of PVs across the country. But would the price have dropped without the extensive support provided by the EEG? What are the key characteristics that make climate policy effective? And how can regulation keep up with new technology and the changing landscape of the energy industry? Should policy drive or simply enable change? From grid planning to emissions targets, there are a variety of approaches and factors that must be considered. And while policy is just one piece of the puzzle, there is no doubt that it plays a vital role in our transition to a carbon-neutral world.
Okay, thank you very much, Greta, for this very warm introduction. I must say I'm really stoked by this conference up to now. I've watched a couple of sessions yesterday and today, and I was sheerly awed by the sheer competence and skill of all the speakers involved. I've seen so many highly skilled people and highly motivated people working on fighting global warming and promoting the energy revolution. That is really encouraging, and I think it gives hope to everyone not only working in this subject. But as Michael from Röder told us, even the highest skilled people and the best technologies cannot succeed if the overall framework does not support them. And that's why I think it's really important to also talk about energy and climate policy, and that's the subject of our third block of the gridX conference this year. When we talk about energy and climate policy, there's a long list of different topics we could touch today. I think it's best to focus on the most pressing questions, and we have selected two of them for today. First, we want to speak about renewable energies and how we can promote them. And second, after that, we want to see how the system can be changed in order to be able to cope with this high share of renewable energies that will come in the futures. When we talk about renewable energies, I think we also have to talk about PV. And that's why I'm glad to have an outspoken expert on PV energy today at the gridX conference. I think Naomi Chevillard from SolarPower Europe is an outspoken expert. Hello, Naomi.
Hi, nice to be with you.
You have worked for a few years at RTE in France, also as a policy advisor, and you have learned about the bird's eye view from the system, and now you are at the Brussels Association working on solar PV. I'm really happy to have you on board today and looking forward to your keynote speech.
Thank you, William, first for the invitation and for this introductory words. So now I will share my screen to give you a quick presentation and as an input to our discussion. Okay, so just to start with and to introduce myself, indeed I work for SolarPower Europe. SolarPower Europe is the trade association which represents the solar PV industry, which means more than 250 organizations along the value chain. You see the slide, the graph on the right, that it's companies producing raw materials to companies developing storage, installing projects, etc., etc. We're based in Brussels, and we both work on policy environment and also support businesses. So today, I just would like to give you an idea of what changes in the system, in the energy system, and what's the contribution of solar PV to those changes, namely the decentralization of the energy system. So a couple of figures. First of all, we're facing in the solar industry a huge growth of solar installations in general, but also in particular of solar PV rooftop. Why? First, because we realize that there's a huge potential to install solar on rooftop. If we take the available rooftops in the EU, we could power already a fourth of the electricity consumption of Europe, and that's figures from the Joint Research Center. This is something that we start to see in practice in the market. On the graph here, you see the growth forecast of the IEA of commercial and industrial systems, which are systems between 10 kilowatt and 1 megawatt. And you can see that there is really a huge growth and the capacity that will triple between 2019 and 2024. The result is what I just mentioned, decentralization of the energy system, with, again, figures from the IEA, a share of decentralized or distributed PV that is at 68% of the current European solar PV capacity today, and that should remain at around 50% in the next year. So the share of distributed PV compared to full capacity is this line in red that you can see on the graph. That's for the next years, but that will really shape the future of the energy system. We at SolarPower Europe, we conducted a study called 100% Renewable Europe, which is a study where we modeled the future of the energy system with the La Parenta University, which has an advanced modeling tool for the energy system. We modeled scenarios, and in particular 100% renewable energy scenarios. And what we see in those scenarios is that we'll have an electricity system with a lot of solar and with a lot of very local exchanges. In particular, we realized that 85% of the electricity is generated in the demand in the region where demand originates. So that's why, and that's what we talk about when we mention decentralization of the energy system. Which brings me to an opportunity, which is the prosumer opportunity. With all this local solar production, we'll have consumers that will become not only consumers, but also renewable energy generators and flexibility providers. I already talked about the growth of rooftop PV, but of course, it's not only that, it's also the growth of flexibility sources, so battery storage, EVs, demand-side response. Here you can see a graph from our European market outlook for storage, which shows the important growth trend in the residential battery market. But it's also digital technologies that open this opportunity. And here you can see in the graph, again, figures from the IEA showing the trend, the investment trend that we have in digital technologies in the energy system. And those figures are from 2017, so the figures today could be even more impressive. This means new opportunities for the system. Prosumers unlock private investment into new renewable energy generation using available space, also boosting public acceptance because solar PV, rooftop PV is PV that is owned by consumers. Facilitated energy system integration, in particular with new electric loads, the whole concept of powering your EV and charging your EV with rooftop PV. It's also the possibility to activate new cost-competitive sources of local flexibility that will be able to adapt to local new electric loads. It means also an optimized use of the electricity system with reduced use of grids and reduced needs for investment in copper. And finally, it could also be increased resilience of the energy system with the possibility to generate electricity really locally close to the consumption points. But this opportunity also comes with challenges, and I want to go through a couple of them. First of all, local solar and storage remains still challenging for two reasons. First, it's a bit less cost competitive than large-scale solar and storage, but it's also an administrative hurdle for a building's owner or building's occupants to develop solar PV on their roof. There are also many barriers to the provision of flexibility from prosumers. We still have double taxation on the provision of flexibility from battery storage. We still have issues for aggregators to participate in energy markets. Those markets for flexibility, so for example, local flexibility or futures flexibility services, non-frequency related, are not yet completely developed across Europe. We will also have to deal with an increased complexity in connecting to the grid those new prosumer assets, which means that we'll have to find solutions to deal with this complexity, at the same time simplifying things for consumers. And finally, the whole system will require an increased volume of data to be processed. So there is an opportunity, there are also challenges, which means that in the next year, we'll have to address all of these challenges through innovative policy measures. Those innovative policy measures must be streamlined in all aspects of energy policies, from grid planning to grid market designs, etc. But I think it's also important to not only have innovative solutions, but also a strategy and a clear vision of where we are going and how we can really deploy this prosumer opportunity. So that was for my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Naomi. That was really interesting. I've now a ton of questions, but I would like to invite all the audience to write their questions into the chat so that I can read them to you. We already have one question from the chat. I would like to give it to you. What are the necessary skills that employees will need to reskill in the future to further improve the solar industry?
So it's a good question because indeed this is an important challenge for the solar PV industry. One of the main issues that we will have lies in the installation sector. So all the people that will install the solar PV systems, the inverters in houses. we already see in some countries a shortage of installers. So we need to train those people. But we also need to train them in using all the digital technologies that we will need and to repair those technologies. And that takes time, that takes investment into new trainings, and that will mean some investment from member states. At the same time, it's also an opportunity because we see that this kind of jobs are also jobs that are well suited, for example, for regions where you have an employment base that is more based, for example, on polluting activity, like coal mining activities, these kind of things.
Okay. Yeah, definitely, that makes sense. And do you also think that this is a major factor contributing to the detail that rooftop PV is more costly and not as competitive as other PV installations? That there is a lack of installers, or what are the main factors driving this fact?
So the skill issue is not an issue, and it's not a reason for this the fact that rooftop PV is more expensive. The reason why rooftop PV is more expensive is just that you cannot achieve the same economies of scale that you have with ground-mounted PV. For a rooftop PV installations, you will have more. The cost of installation, the cost of administrative procedures, for example, is more important compared to the cost of the modules. Whereas on a large PV project, you have you can also spread those costs on the whole project. So per unit of electricity generated, that's why you have higher cost for rooftop PV.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what do you think then of initiatives like the one the Berlin government just decided? I think they approved a law last week to make PV installations mandatory for all new buildings and large renovations, if it's residential or industrial buildings. Is this a law that should be installed in all European countries or on a European level as well?
Yes, this is something that we strongly support indeed. And we actually called for a similar obligation or a similar measure to be adopted at European Union level, as the European Union is revising the Renewable Energy Directive. The reason is that we think that rooftops are really a huge opportunity to develop solar and a possibility to develop solar where you don't have conflicts on land. You don't have you don't have the NIMBY effect, basically. And we think it's very important to politically say that we will support this kind of systems, rooftop PV, prosumers, even though today they are not fully flexible or they cannot sell their electricity on the market, or maybe it's a bit more expensive to support this prosumer. But we're really confident that in the next decade, we'll find all the solutions and all the frameworks to make these prosumers bring all the value they will bring to the system. But this will only happen if we make strong investment decisions now into citizens' energy.
Yeah, definitely. And if you think about this prosumer and the flexibility and technologies that should be deployed, what do you think about residential batteries? Should it be also mandatory to have a battery installed when you install a PV system?
We do mandatory, no, but we think it's important indeed that there are the right incentives for the batteries to be installed. It's already going into the right direction. We have investment subsidies in different countries where you have really support given to solar and storage, so that really incentivize the consumer to buy a battery. We also see that now we switch from a logic of net metering or pure injection to the network to a logic where we would more self-consume. And there is a clear incentive for battery storage to be installed. But again, batteries today, prosumer batteries, are not used at their full potential. They can really provide a vast variety of services, and we're only starting to discover what the services could be. But it's still important, I think, to push the installation of those batteries today as we discover all the opportunities that they have for the system.
Okay. There's a question from the audience also tapping into that topic. How do we tackle the issue of expensive battery storage in the future?
Battery storage today is becoming more and more cost competitive, and more and more cheaper and cheaper to be installed. Now it's true that the remuneration, the possibility to remunerate the battery from services to the grid is not fully developed. Because there are some obstacles to that. Again, markets are not made for batteries, even less made for aggregators that aggregate batteries flexibility. We have this question of double taxation on storage, because storage is not fully defined in the EU law. But I think in the next decade, those markets and those issues will really find solutions, and batteries will really have a central place in the future energy system.
Definitely. There's another good question from the audience. What's the current status of recycling old PV system? And I think this is also very relevant in Germany. I've known that there are more and more PV systems now over the age of 20 years, so their funding is running out. And I think it's the question always, do you use them or do you recycle them, or what to do with them?
So at the moment, indeed, we have PV that starts to arrive at the end of the support schemes, but they are still used. And actually, we don't have a lot of waste yet in the solar PV industry. That's why we are really, basically, we don't have the demand, so the offer is not fully developed. However, this is something that we do anticipate. Technically, there are no obstacles to recycling PV. It's 90%, 95% of the PV system that can be recycled. Now we have to have the companies that do that. And this is something on which we are working. There are a number of initiatives already in place. The industry has set an organization called PV Cycle that is dealing with the preparation of this recycling industry. We have companies that start investing into that industry, and this is something that we'll see more structured in the next years.
Cool. Maybe coming back to the cost issue, I've seen in Germany a lot of installations, large-scale PV installations that come without funding, that don't need EEG funding, that are purely competitive on the market. And we've seen globally auctions of PV that bring prices down to a few cents per kilowatt hour. So I think PV is truly competitive, but do you think that there's still financial funding needed, and why?
So, yes, it's true that we have a growing market of subsidy-free projects, in particular power purchase agreements. I think the total volume of PPAs, wind and solar, was at 8 gigawatt last year, but I hope I'm not giving the wrong figure, but it's quite impressive. Now, I think subsidies will still have a role because energy is still also, in a way, a public good, and we need to somehow invest to shape the type of energy system we need in the future. In particular, we see an issue with the volatility of electricity market prices. As you have more and more renewable in the system, prices go a lot down and or change a lot, and we need, which means that it is more and more uncertain what remuneration you will get from markets. Which means that when you do an investment on solar PV, and solar PV is a capex intensive investment, you have a higher uncertainty, and it becomes more challenging to finance the project. So public support comes as an insurance mechanism, basically, to these systems. And another role of public support is to drive the installation of the best performing projects. I talked about, for example, rooftop. Rooftop still needs public support to be developed, but it's the same situation for innovative projects. We have, for example, agri-solar projects where you have solar panels integrated on agricultural installations and providing, for example, shades to crops or to cattle. This kind of installation still needs a bit of support, cannot compete with the normal basic installations and still needs some public support.
Of course, yeah. I think it's also a social question, right? You have to make it available for the broad mass and not only a product for the rich. That's why I think support is really relevant. We have another good question from the audience. Marcus is asking, should local governments offer schemes like community shared PV and storage systems to households which can afford to buy one?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think, well, local governments are themselves consumers of energy. And they have a role themselves for their own buildings and their own installations. They have a role in being the example, basically, and sourcing renewable electricity. But they can also definitely help their citizens to enter into the same type of organizations. The Renewable Energy Directive, which was adopted in 2018, has defined a new concept, which is called the Citizen Energy Community. And the idea is really to facilitate the citizen organizations that want to invest into renewable energy, similar to what could happen in, for example, in an organic food cooperative, basically. The idea is to facilitate this kind of organizations, and local authorities should really seize the opportunity to promote that in their communities.
Yeah, I've seen this law is implemented differently among the member states. For example, Austria just put a new renewable law introducing those communities, but I think Germany is still a little bit reluctant. This is a question that leads me to the aspect of EU policy as a total. Do you think that energy and climate policy should be brought more on an EU level and be harmonized, and that the EU Commission should be solely responsible for those topics, or is it good in the hands of the national governments?
Well, I mean, climate change is a shared challenge. So I think it's critical that we all align, all EU countries align in fighting and addressing this challenge, and we've made good steps because we've adopted the objective of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. So yes, absolutely. Then the EU policy, more harmonization on EU policy is also important for industries, so that industries have access to uniform standards when they enter the EU market, but that they have more visibility on what is the energy support schemes, for example, in different countries. And that's also a way to boost the EU companies that we have active in the renewable energy industry. Now, of course, the energy transition, there is also a local story. And I very much believe in the role of local authorities in implementing all of these tools and ideas that come from the EU, and there is a lot of local intelligence also to use when we do the energy transition.
Perfect. So, as a last question, maybe one last short answer from your side. If you could change in the Fit for 55 package one thing, what would it be? Well,
it's difficult to reply like that. I think because it's this event, I hope the Fit for 55 package will give a real push for prosumers, which means really boosting the development of rooftop PV and make it mandatory on all buildings. And at the same time, having a strategy on how to make prosumers really smart for the energy system.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for this interesting talk. It was amazing having you at the gridXdays, and looking forward to talking to you soon.
Likewise.